Hello, welcome to Ladies Corner with Tea. Ladies Corner is a weekly talk show about women. Tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce founder of the Ribbon Rouge Foundation, Miss Morenike Olaosebikan. Ribbon Rouge Foundation has worked in Edmonton since its registration in 2013. It was created to close the gap in gender and racial disparities faced by African, Caribbean, and Black communities. They do this through storytelling, community engaged arts, and meaningful community conversations. At the core of their work is addressing social injustice brought about by inequalities such as economic disparities, barrier to justice, and peculiar problems faced by Black Canadians. Miss Olaosebikan joins us tonight to talk about brilliant social innovative initiative called Beer. Welcome, Miss Olaosebikan. Welcome, Morenike. Welcome to Ladies Corner.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and I look forward to the conversation.
I am happy to have you. Thank you. There's still echoing of sorts tonight, but we're just gonna have to make do with the kind of internet that we have. In 2013, when you founded Ribbon Rouge Foundation, why was it important to you then, and is this still important to you now?
Why was Ribbon Rouge important to me? Oh, wow. Okay. I actually started Ribbon Rouge as a student. And so it was way back in 2006. And at the time, it was from a place of naivety. I wanted us to raise enough money to deal with HIV in African countries. And at the time, it was because of a series of life events. I had contracted tuberculosis when I was younger. So I saw the impact of HIV on people of African descent in living in Africa, and just really wanted us to find a way to make a difference. And this was the initial reason why it was really important. I had learned about mother to child transmission, and over the years learned that there were some years where up to 60,000 babies were born with HIV in the country I'm from, Nigeria, in 1 year, and that just felt really unfair. And initially, that was the driving force. But over the years, I just got to learn more about the injustices in disparities between health outcomes and health access for people of African descent and those who are compared to those who are not of African descent. And the injustice in there just became a major motivation for me and my friends and the community members that have since rallied around to make Ribbon Rouge what it is. And so that this is why it was important to actually strive for fairness, I suppose.
Okay, so that was really Black equity or equity in healthcare. And I'm just wondering, in 2021, for those who do not know, what does an inequitable solution looks like?
So I think there's a number of statistics that I can throw out, and I think a lot of them just cover very entangled systems. And so, for example, even though Black people are only, according to the last census, about 3% of the population in Canada, in Alberta as well, when you look at people living with HIV, we comprise 14, people of African descent comprise 14% of that, of people living with HIV. And there was certain years, like between 2013 and 2014, where a third of the new infections were actually in people of African descent. And that really bothers me because when you actually go looking for data to understand why that's the case, there wasn't a lot out there to explain it. It's almost like it's just a given, like it's just accepted that, well, that's the case. But then it's also the disproportional incarceration. at Ribbon Rouge, we take the broadest view on health. Health isn't just the clinical blood pressure or blood glucose levels. It actually has to do with your well-being. And people incarcerated, when they are having mental health difficulties or struggling with addictions, to us is it's a health issue. Um, and so disproportionate incarceration of Black people, underemployment and unemployment, and how that contributes to health problems, food security. And when you compare the levels of food security in Black populations and those that are not Black, and all these issues for us represent those disparities in health access and health outcomes. And these these are driven by factors that involve racism, as people understand it, just interpersonal. Someone calls you a slur word, or attacks you interpersonally, but also in the systems, in which organizations get funded and which ones don't, in um, what sort of policies and procedures and laws are put in place that protect, and which ones aren't there to protect people who are marginalized. And these root causes actually are then expressed in more mental health complications that are not addressed in Black populations, addiction issues that are not addressed. They're not even recorded. So we don't even have numbers, for example, for how many Black people of African descent died through the opioid crisis, for example. In Canada, in the US, you're able to say, okay, Black people are disproportionately affected by COVID. In Canada, we don't even have the data. That's how institutional racism shows up here and causes these health disparities. And that's what Ribbon Rouge is trying to address. It's understanding, quantifying, qualifying, understanding what these gaps are, and then having real world solutions to actually close these gaps and improve our health outcomes overall.
Thank you for that. I want to do one more question. When you talk about all the disparities and the lack of records for Black people, maybe you get addictions, just that addictions issues are not even reported. Would you then say that all of this is a systematic effort to disenfranchise Black people generally by the Canadian society? Is this what we feel?
That one's a really tough. This is a tough question. I do think that there are active processes in place to um, that further racism and that further the impact and the effects of racism. That being said, I would also, that's a tough question. I don't imagine that there is a legislator out there or some head of a department out there that's actually going, what I want to do today is make sure that Black people are disenfranchised in Alberta, and that's why we're not going to gather disaggregated data. So it's not necessarily that there are people in positions of decision-making authority that are actively, by not gathering the right data, plotting to disenfranchise Black people. I do think that the effect of the decisions that are made actively by decision makers do end up disempowering Black people. And so, by that line of thinking, it then becomes important that decision makers in different spheres, in public sector and private sector, actually are aware that the decisions that are being made actively oppress Black people. So I hope that answers your question. So I don't think it's necessarily that people are intending and plotting and designing ways to disenfranchise. But in the particular question you asked also about disaggregated Black data, I do think that people are actively making decisions that end up causing the disenfranchisement. And so not knowing that what you're doing is oppressive is not necessarily an excuse for you not to educate yourself, be enlightened, and then contribute active solutions in the different spheres of public service that we have in the province. I hope that answers your question.
Oh yes, it definitely adds more light to it. Thank you for that very thoughtful answer. I just want to take you back to something you said. All of this provides the system, and these are your words, that determines which organizations get funded and not funded. And I'm thinking even for Ribbon Rouge as well, I read somewhere that since the pandemic started, not just Ribbon Rouge, but lots of not-for-profits have suffered because they could not get funding to carry on as normal. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in this era. We have more and more Black representation. We have more and more of us sitting at positions of power, and yet we're still getting underfunded in the things that matter.
So you're wondering my thoughts about this. Actually, Ribbon Rouge shut down by the last quarter of last year. We shut down our operations because we ran out of money, and it became a very desperate scramble to get funded and to actually be able to put back people in the different volunteer committees and groups that we had formed over the years to do wraparound shared care in community and to do the kind of work that we do around research and listening and just to mobilize in the foundation. And it has been a long journey to finally get to a place where I feel more comfortable and confident that Ribbon Rouge actually hopefully is going to be sustainable going forward. My thinking around this issue of organizations that are Black led not necessarily receiving the kind of support that they need. My experiences over the last few years tells me that there are processes and people and just the status quo that has been set up over the years that need to be dismantled and reorganized for meaningful, lasting change. It's not just going to be a bunch of tokens on, and forgive me for saying it this way, and it's not meant to slam or attack anyone who's Black and is actually on a decision-making table about funding. I do think that it's going to go, the change that needs to happen needs to be far more than a few Black people being represented on jury committees or decision-making spaces. There's the work, the deeper work in each person who is not Black, to understand their privilege, to actually negotiate what it means to be anti-racist. There's that deeper work that needs to happen on an individual level, but then there's also just systems change work that needs to happen in what gets prioritized, how the decisions get made around the criteria for funding, how decisions get made around understanding the nuances of grassroots organizations and the lived experiences of actually running and administering these sort of organizations. That kind of change is far more deep-seated in funding structures than just, oh, we're going to get some representation on the jury committee, and that's how we think we're going to redistribute funding. That's not going to be enough. I guess that's what I think about that.
It seems to me, well, thank you, that is such a very big and difficult problem. My question is, if tonight Mr. Kenny happened to stumble on this video, or the mayor of Edmonton, Mr. Avington, what would you want to say to them that could change the fate, the destiny of not like yourself?
Hmm. I would, I would say, especially for Black-led organizations, that it is important that when funding calls are put out, or when the vehicles of making sure that not-for-profits get sustainable are thought through, that these calls and these processes actually be co-created with communities, be co-created with leaders in these communities, as well as people um, that are change agents in these communities. And that also, that the way the calls are put out, that a lot more consideration needs to be put into, in my opinion, funding collaboration. So putting calls out that then pit us against each other
Mm,
and makes it harder for each of us to actually survive is not helpful. I think the design of what is funded, how the calls are put out, I think way more thought needs to be put in there. I think also just the entire way funding happens, in my mind, seems broken. So putting these calls out, the joke I always make is, let's say you're an elephant, a call comes out and says you have to be a giraffe. All of a sudden, you see everybody that's elephant, goat, sheep, everybody's now trying to be a giraffe. The
mm.
next call comes out, now you have to be a tree. Everybody is now the elephant, giraffe, goat, sheep, tree. And then and you can just see where I'm going with this. And I think it just makes more sense to actually develop and nurture relationships with change makers, people who are actually leaving impact and outcomes in communities, to co-design funding, to co-create resourcing, to figure out collaborative approaches, ecosystem approaches, environment-based change that involves building bridges, building links. And that requires deeper work that's not just based on a political term, or your chances of being reelected. That actually requires working in and with communities, right? Um, I think that's what I would want to say to an elected official.
Thank you for that helpful answer. But I'm still not getting, my 15-second, you know, um, word of faith to Mr. Kenny tonight. What do you want the, the premier to do if he was listening? With the premier, I need it done, and he will say, "Okay, I got it." What is that one thing
With
that will
regards
make
to
a difference?
funding, with regards to funding, or just in Black communities in
Just
general?
genuinely, what's that one thing that
Oh, okay. I thought you were
you
asking about funding in particular. Okay.
what is it you
Okay.
like,
Okay.
yeah, the
I
premier
would I would definitely put out a call for a very firm and a very firm stance on redressing anti-Black racism, a very firm stance on gathering disaggregated data within not just education, which is beginning to look more like reality, but within the health systems, within the criminal justice systems, within settlement, and not just the gathering of disaggregated data to understand how the various racial injustices are affecting Black people in these systems, but also the governance of that. So actually looking at what are the structures that are actually going to get Black people governing these governing disaggregated data in a way that's useful for us, in a way that we can actually take the data and we can actually change we can effect change in the different systems and in different problem areas in different institutions. I would also say that we definitely need a way to understand where funding is currently going and see where the redundancies are, and then to reorganize in a way that Black-led organizations actually address more of the concerns in our communities, that we are resourced to do that, that we are supported to do that. I would also put a call out also in particular around young Black men and the incarceration rates that are experienced within our communities, because what we experienced over the last 3 years of the listening campaign was just the way young Black men who should be in mental health institutions or getting help with addictions recovery, the way they just ended up in jail way more often than you can imagine, and the struggle with that, and the level of racism in these systems, and just the way our health and supportive services and corrections agents, the way they are complicit in a lot of that injustice. And so calling on the premier or our elected officials to actually do the work in supporting us, understanding what's going on there and redressing that. I think part of a lot of the problems that, especially in Alberta, is I often say that the way Canadians in general and Albertans in general cover racism is to just not know, to just not have the data. And I think that supporting applied research work, supporting um, a deeper understanding of these different issues actually is the first step, but also then developing with communities real world and lasting solutions to these problems. I would also, I guess, highlight entrepreneurship. So one of the stories that came up over and over in the listening campaign is this the issue of underemployment in our communities. So someone comes here, they're trying to be a physician, they're trying to be a pharmacist, and for whatever reason, instead of that, what ends up happening is a decision gets made because it's the difficulty in actually fulfilling these accreditations. The way it's structured currently, it's far easier to just go to a college and get a diploma for something else.
Mm.
What we experienced through the listening campaign then is, when you're making this decision, you're not thinking this is something that's going to affect you for 2, 3 generations, right?
Mm.
What ends up happening is someone does that. Now they're not in the profession they came in. They're not able to support their family. Now they're working 2, 3 jobs. Guess what? That child is experiencing racism in the education system. What you have now is children who get streamed into lower grades, end up in the criminal justice system with addictions and mental health. It's an all too familiar story, and it's a very simplistic narrative, but this is a pattern that we heard a lot in the listening campaign. And what this meant for me listening to these stories is, you have someone then that comes in, ends up underemployed, and is in the injustice is inherited as a health issue in the next generation. And so there is a desperate need, I think, for the our elected officials. I know that there's now the Black Entrepreneurship Program. It's yet to be determined how that's going to pan out and who's actually going to benefit from that influx of funds. But I think there is a desperate need for not just the words, but actual political support for Black entrepreneurship, enterprise, employment, meaningful, sustainable, lasting employment, because of the impact that that then has in Black families long term. And it's really interesting to read mandate letters to these ministries, because I know that for example, Black women entrepreneurs are supposed to be the people that the government really want to target and support because we're, maybe a bit more, not maybe, more marginalized in entrepreneurial spaces, especially with tech, construction, manufacturing. And as someone that's currently in those spaces, I can tell you that that is not the experience I've had when dealing with government officials. And I think um, perhaps if your question is what I want to say to elected officials, it would be more doing of the things you say you're doing. Um, the things that you commit to want to do, to support and to enable capacity in our communities.
Morenike, I was just wondering whether you have been able to send your report to the Minister of and the Solicitor General, who is a black man, Minister Casey Madu. I'm just wondering if he's aware of your report. Um, and just listeners, if you're aware, we're talking about the Ribbon Rouge Foundation report to equity, social innovation for black equity. That's what we're talking about. The criminal justice part of this is very significant. Do you have audience with the minister? Has he heard your concerns? Is he working on your concerns?
One second, I'm going to put on my headset. I'm thinking, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
that's not
ma'am,
working.
I can hear you.
I'm trying to see if I can turn down the echo, but that didn't work out. Okay, so sending a note to Minister Madu. I No, we haven't sent our report that way. We have several reports through the listening campaign as well. The one that you're referring to is this summary that we attach to our emails. I have been contacted though by his office because there is a desire to have a conversation about the work that we're doing, not just um, with the criminal justice system and our findings from the listing campaign, but also some curiosity about the Black equity in Alberta rainforest going forward. So we have made contact, but we haven't yet engaged in further discussions. His office is a key stakeholder in a lot of these conversations because you're right, there is this strong criminal justice component to a lot of the work we've been doing.
So in a way, not all government officials are not so supportive. Mr. Madu's office may be supportive once they hear the full story.
Once they hear the stories, perhaps, I guess, yeah, I shouldn't just like label that all government officials are not supportive. I would say though that anti-Black racism is deeply entrenched in our systems, including especially public service institutions. That's not to say that on an individual level, each person or each official is racist, but the systems themselves and then some of the interpersonal experiences definitely don't help.
Okay, so you've come up with a brilliant socially innovative initiative designed to mobilize data to bring meaningful change to Black health equity. And the initiative is the Black Equity in Alberta Rainforest. What is this? Let's talk about your initiative.
Okay, so I guess the term rainforest to begin. I guess the nerdy part of me that is very into social innovation, thinking and language couldn't help herself but to name the initiative a rainforest. And the rainforest in social innovation theory is this idea of rampant collaboration and really mapping out leaders, stakeholders in that really collaborative environment, and that being the main source of innovation. So it's this idea or way of thinking that to actually nurture innovation, you need to focus on the environment that innovation happens. And it's not so much that you build something innovative, you actually create the kind of environment that innovation can thrive in. And so this idea of the rainforest is just basically focusing on the kind of transdisciplinary, intersectoral collaboration that you need to have across scales, across departments, that you need to have for you to actually have innovative things occur. And so also, I couldn't help calling it the Black Equity in Alberta Rainforest because it's a rainforest in Alberta. And the chances of that happening in real life are next to none. So the bear of Black Equity in Alberta Rainforest really looks at how can we collaborate at scale to change some of these deeply entrenched issues that we've discussed, to address really complex problems around poverty, around unemployment and underemployment, around disproportional incarceration, around health access barriers to health access for Black people living with HIV, um, the issues around entrepreneurship and Black enterprise and not being funded, not being sustainable. Like all these are issues that are layered. And so what the Black Equity in Alberta Rainforest actually is an opportunity to bring together almost 600 stakeholders. So as many Black businesses as we can connect to, as many educational institutions, stakeholders from the criminal justice systems, from the health systems, from settlement, and just bringing together people who are key decision makers in the prioritized problem areas that we noted in the listening campaign that the Ribbon Rouge Foundation ran over the last few years, and bringing all these people together in a sustained way over the next 3 years to really uncover these issues. So within the rainforest, we have 7 professors working with us from the University of Alberta and Northwest. And we recently received funding that is going to allow us employ up to 13 Black scholars. This gives me so much joy. I think of all the things I can um, say makes me proud and joyful about Ribbon Rouge, this thing, this ability to now be able to employ 13 Black scholars is something that just gives me so much joy, because we're going to look out for people who usually won't have access, who might not have had access to academia, and now will be paid to do work that can contribute to their grad school, but also meaningfully impacts community. And so it's not just research for the sake of research, it's applied social R&D, if you will, where we are learning and doing, we're learning and we're fixing as we go with community in collaboration with almost 600 institutions and communities and partners, and just that robust rainforest environment to actually come up with innovative ways to address these issues that we've been talking about, and to do that in a sustained way over the next 3 years. So that's the bear, and that's what gets me excited about the bear.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, congratulations for getting the funding. The initial package was so, anti-black racism. You feel the burden and the darkness. And I'm happy, that you did get funding. There's some positive is coming to come out of all the good work that you have been doing. I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on this. Last year we had the Black Lives Matter huge protest campaign, and lots of anecdotal stories reflect that the loss of Black people improved a lot because of that. Did you feel any of that improvement in your listening campaign?
Hmm. ah, that's how do I answer this question? Um ah okay, so I don't want to be a downer. I want to be cheery and happy. Um you know what I do think? I think there's a little crack in the door, like the door opened a little bit for us to have these conversations. Um, the proposal that ended up getting funded for Black Equity in Alberta Rainforest is a proposal that was written in December last year, and then shopped around and from February, and then just shopped around till we got funding in the last quarter of last year. Um, and you know what? Black Lives Matter, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter as a movement, and as a movement that people were willing to even listen to, more willing than in the past, because you had way more racial diversity in the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020 than previously. That was was definitely a supportive factor in us getting funding, for example. Things like us even just being able to talk about this at work, you know, that's some progress, right? Um, in the past, I remember that for me to land on the statement, and this is why anti-Black racism is a health issue, it would actually require maybe 4 paragraphs leading up to that, before that became a line that I could say in a funding application, for example. But now, I mean, the environment has changed such that that could be the first sentence, right? The first sentence, and it's not challenged. So to a certain extent, we're at least now having the conversation. We are now in a situation where like actually targeting Black people for funding is no longer an unusual thought. um, we're in a position where programs at scale are being directed at Black communities. I think what I would like to see is deeper. I would like to see that actual legislation starts to shift in our favor, that policies, public health policies, that action actually starts to happen at the systems level. Like we actually, for example, have governance over disaggregated Black data that's Black led, that is across all these different institutions in a way that actually favors our health outcomes, favors our health access. And I guess that's to be determined. It's to be determined if all the conversations and the initial traction we had actually leads in that direction. Like what happens with policing Black people? Do we actually defund the police? Do we um, reorganize funds from policing Black people into actually enabling community health, Black community health? Like, what are the deeper changes that actually happen from all of that? It's to be determined, right? But for now, I think, I mean, at least the door opened a little bit. Let's see if the door continues to open for us to actually walk through completely into a changed into changed systems, right? Let's see if that actually happens.
Miss Morenike, you're an intellectual, you're a light in Edmonton's darkness, and we're proud of the work you're doing in our community. I have not been able to go through all the questions that are listed. We've run out of time, not of questions, and I am really grateful for you taking the time. What I will do is I will reach out to you again, and we can carry on brainstorming, talking intellectually about about what you do because it's so profound. It touches even me and the quality of my life, our lives in the city. You have a call to action. People who are listening and watching, what is it exactly you want them to do?
I would say that when Ribbon Rouge inevitably reaches out to you because we want to collaborate with you in our rainforest, just say yes. Just be part of the movement. Like, even if you have no clue how you're going to be that part of the movement, join
Please.
us, reach out to us. Let's figure out what your collaboration brings because we are very open to working with across differences and within our communities to actually come up with innovative ways to close these gaps in health outcomes, mental health, physical, sexual health, and to understand them and then to close them. So, yeah.
On your website, your call to action is asking people to donate money as well, in
Oh,
addition to
right. Yes. How could I
you can
forget?
you can
Give
just
us money. Look at that. I'm a crafty fundraiser, obviously. Go to our website, take action by donating to us, please. Your funds go towards providing wraparound care, like systems navigation for Black people who have fallen through the cracks. This is cracks in our systems and are struggling with mental health issues. And some of your funds go towards work with actually understanding, putting numbers to these disparities and then addressing them. um, your funds go to Black women living with HIV and then addressing some of their health issues as well. So does really good work, really impactful work. So donate to us. Go to our website and donate to us.
Miss Morenike Olaosebikan. I want to say thank you so much for your time tonight. We will do this certainly. And to
And
our audience, don't go away. We have links in the show notes. Up next, this lady's coming. See you soon. Thank you, Morenike.
yeah, bye.